I never thought a single moment at the company holiday party would completely rewrite my destiny. One second, I was just another mid-level marketing coordinator trying to blend into the background. The next, I was being publicly humiliated in front of my entire company. But then a voice I'd never heard before would change everything. If you've ever felt powerless, invisible, or like you didn't belong in the room, this story will show you that sometimes the universe orchestrates the most unexpected rescues. Stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and 6 months ago, I was drowning in mediocrity at Morrison Associates, a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Chicago. At 27, I had been working there for 3 grueling years, watching as my more connected colleagues climbed the ladder while I remained stuck in the same cramped cubicle, handling the projects nobody else wanted. My recent breakup with my college boyfriend had left me questioning everything about my life choices, and I was living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment that barely qualified as habitable. The annual holiday party at the Fairmont Hotel was supposed to be the highlight of our corporate calendar. It was the one night when the company spared no expense, transforming the grand ballroom into something magical with crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, and enough champagne to float a yacht. For weeks leading up to the event, the office buzzed with excitement as people discussed their outfits, their plus-ones, and their strategies for networking with the executives who rarely ventured down to our floor. I had spent my last bit of discretionary income on a simple black dress from Target, hoping it would help me blend in with my better-dressed colleagues. I arrived at the party alone, clutching my purse nervously as I surveyed the room filled with beautiful people in expensive clothes. The marketing department had always been divided into clear social hierarchies, and I knew exactly where I fit in the pecking order. Near the bottom. The ballroom was magnificent, with its soaring ceilings and elegant decor creating an atmosphere of sophistication that made everyone feel more important than they actually were. Round tables draped in crisp white linens surrounded a dance floor where couples swayed to the live jazz band's smooth melodies. The bar was surrounded by clusters of animated conversations, punctuated by bursts of laughter that seemed just a bit too loud, as if everyone was trying to prove how much fun they were having. I found myself gravitating toward the appetizer table, partly because I was genuinely hungry and partly because it gave me something to do with my hands. The spread was impressive. Jumbo shrimp arranged on ice sculptures, delicate canapes topped with caviar, and an assortment of gourmet cheeses that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. As I reached for a small plate, I noticed Patricia Whitmore approaching from across the room. Patricia was the Senior Vice President of Client Relations, a woman in her early 50s who commanded respect through a combination of sharp intelligence and carefully cultivated intimidation. She had perfectly coiffed silver hair, wore designer suits that fit like armor, and possessed the kind of confidence that could silence a room with a single glance. She was also known for her explosive temper and her tendency to humiliate subordinates who crossed her path at the wrong moment. She had never spoken directly to me in my 3 years at the company, communicating only through her assistant or through terse emails that made me feel like I was being scolded by a disappointed teacher. Tonight she looked particularly elegant in a burgundy silk dress that probably cost more than I made in several months, and she moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of someone who was used to being the most powerful person in any room. I tried to make myself invisible as she approached, focusing intently on the selection of crackers and hoping she would walk past without noticing me. But fate had other plans. As I reached across the table for a small sandwich, I accidentally bumped into her, causing her to spill a few drops of red wine on the sleeve of her expensive dress. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Her face flushed with rage and her eyes blazed with an intensity that made my stomach drop to the floor. The conversations around us gradually quieted as people began to notice the commotion, and I felt the familiar sensation of becoming the unwanted center of attention. "You clumsy fool," she hissed, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've just done?" I stammered an apology, reaching for my napkin to help clean up the minimal spill, but she slapped my hand away with surprising force. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Don't you dare touch me," she snarled, her voice getting louder with each word. "You've done quite enough damage already. Look at what you've done. This dress is ruined, completely ruined, and it's all because you're too stupid to watch where you're going." The crowd around us was growing larger as people abandoned their conversations to witness what was clearly becoming a public execution. I could see my colleagues watching with mixtures of sympathy, embarrassment, and morbid fascination. I tried again to apologize, my voice barely above a whisper, as I explained that it was an accident, that I hadn't meant to bump into her, that I was truly sorry for any inconvenience. But my words seemed to only fuel her rage further. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the wine on her breath, and her voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow felt more threatening than her shouting. "Inconvenience?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think this is an inconvenience? You have no idea what real consequences look like, but you're about to find out. Do you know who I am? Do you understand the kind of power I have in this company? I can make your pathetic little career disappear with a single phone call." The threat hung in the air like poison, and I felt my face burning with shame and terror. I knew she wasn't bluffing. Patricia Whitmore had a reputation for destroying people who crossed her, and I had just handed her the perfect excuse. My mind raced through all the bills I couldn't afford to pay, all the dreams I couldn't afford to lose, and all the ways my life could fall apart if I lost this job. But the worst was yet to come. As I stood there frozen in humiliation, she raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap across my cheek that echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. The sound seemed to reverberate off the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, creating a moment of absolute silence that felt like it lasted forever. Every conversation stopped. Every glass paused halfway to every mouth. Every eye in the room turned to witness my complete and utter destruction. The pain was immediate and sharp, but the humiliation was infinitely worse. I stood there with my hand pressed to my burning cheek, fighting back tears as I realized that my career, my reputation, and my dignity had just been obliterated in front of everyone I worked with. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably to record what would undoubtedly become the most shared video in our company's history. Patricia stood there looking satisfied with her handiwork, as if she had just taught me an important lesson about knowing my place in the world. The crowd continued to stare in shocked silence, and I realized that no one was going to help me. No one was going to defend me. I was completely alone in this moment of absolute horror. I wanted to run from the ballroom, to disappear from the company, to somehow erase what had just happened and start my life over somewhere else. But I was frozen in place by shock and shame, unable to move or speak or even breathe properly. This was supposed to be a celebration, a night of joy and connection, but instead it had become the most devastating moment of my professional life. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, cutting through the quiet like a blade, came a voice I had never heard before. It was deep, authoritative, and completely calm, but it carried an undertone of steel that made everyone in the ballroom turn to see who had spoken. "Touch my wife again, and see what happens." The voice belonged to a man I had never seen before in my life, but who commanded the immediate attention of everyone in the ballroom. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and wearing an impeccably tailored tuxedo that spoke of serious wealth. But it wasn't his appearance that made people step aside as he moved through the crowd toward me. It was his presence, an invisible force field of confidence and authority that made even the most powerful executives in our company suddenly look like children playing dress-up. I stood there in complete shock, my cheek still stinging from Patricia's slap, trying to process what was happening. This stranger had just claimed I was his wife in front of my entire company, and he was walking toward us with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he was prepared to back up his words with action. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, and I could hear whispers rippling through the ballroom as people tried to figure out who he was and what his connection to me could possibly be. Patricia's face had gone from flushed with anger to pale with confusion in the span of seconds. She looked back and forth between me and the approaching stranger, clearly trying to understand what was happening. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice uncertain for the first time since I had known her. "Your wife? I think there's been some mistake." This is just Sarah Chen, one of our junior marketing coordinators. She's nobody important." The man reached my side and gently placed his arm around my shoulders, a gesture that felt both protective and surprisingly natural despite the fact that we were complete strangers. Up close, I could see that his eyes were a striking shade of blue, and they were focused on Patricia with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. "There's no mistake," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. "You just assaulted my wife in front of hundreds of witnesses. I saw the whole thing." The atmosphere in the ballroom had completely transformed. What had been a festive holiday party just moments before now felt like a courtroom where everyone was waiting to see justice served. I could hear people whispering more urgently now, and someone behind me said, "Do you know who that is?" in a tone that suggested the answer was significant. Patricia's confident demeanor was beginning to crack as she realized that the situation had shifted dramatically out of her control. "I don't know who you think you are," Patricia said, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "But this girl spilled wine on my dress and showed complete disrespect. I was simply teaching her about consequences and proper behavior in a professional setting. Someone of her position needs to understand their place." She gestured dismissively at my simple black dress and continued, "Look at her. She clearly doesn't belong at an event like this." The stranger's expression darkened and I felt his arm tighten protectively around my shoulders. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice dropping to a level that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. "You didn't teach anyone anything except that you're the kind of person who thinks power gives you the right to humiliate others. You attacked someone who was trying to help, someone who showed you more courtesy than you deserved, and you did it because you thought she couldn't defend herself." I was still trying to process the surreal nature of what was happening. This man was defending me with a passion and authority that no one had ever shown on my behalf before. In my 3 years at Morrison Associates, I had learned to expect exactly what had happened with Patricia. I was used to being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as expendable. But this stranger was treating me like I mattered, like I was worth protecting, and it was the most empowering feeling I had ever experienced. The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see people holding up their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in our company's holiday party history. But instead of feeling embarrassed by the attention, I found myself standing a little straighter, drawing strength from the unwavering support of this mysterious man who had appeared out of nowhere to champion my cause. Patricia was looking around the room now, probably searching for allies or trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. But the executives who usually supported her were notably silent, watching the confrontation with expressions of growing concern. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's Marcus Webb," and I saw several people's faces change as recognition dawned. The name meant nothing to me, but it clearly meant something significant to everyone else in the room. "You can't threaten me," Patricia said, but her voice was shaking now. "I've been with this company for 15 years. I have relationships, I have influence, and I won't be intimidated by some outsider who thinks he can walk in here and cause trouble." She looked at me with pure venom and added, "And as for your so-called wife, she's going to find herself looking for a new job very soon. I'll make sure of that." Marcus Webb smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made smart people very nervous. "Actually, I think you're the one who should be worried about job security," he said. "You see, I'm not just some random outsider. I'm the principal investor in Morrison Associates. I own 60% of this company, which means I essentially own 60% of your career." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt, and I heard several people gasp audibly. Patricia's face went from pale to white as the implications of his words sank in. She had just publicly assaulted the wife of the man who could fire her with a single phone call. The power dynamic that she had been so confident about just moments before had not only shifted but completely reversed. She was no longer the predator in this situation, she had become the prey. "That's impossible," she stammered. "The investor information is confidential. How do I know you're telling the truth?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her with the same casual confidence he might use to order a coffee. "Feel free to call my office in the morning to verify," he said. "Though I suspect you'll be too busy updating your resume to worry about fact-checking." I watched Patricia read the business card, and I saw the exact moment when she realized that her world had just collapsed around her. Her hands were trembling as she looked up from the card to stare at Marcus with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The woman who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just minutes before now looked like a child who had been caught breaking something valuable. The crowd around us was buzzing with excitement and shock. I could hear fragments of conversations as people processed what they had just witnessed. Did you see her face when she realized who he was? I can't believe she slapped the investor's wife. Patricia's career is over. This is better than any movie. The energy in the room had completely transformed from horrified silence to electric anticipation. Marcus turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "I want everyone here to understand something important," he said. "What you just witnessed was not just an assault on my wife, but an attack on the values that should define any decent workplace. No one, regardless of their position or title, has the right to humiliate or physically attack another person. The fact that this woman thought she could get away with such behavior suggests that this company has some serious cultural problems that need to be addressed immediately." His words hit the assembled crowd like a wake-up call, and I could see people nodding in agreement. Many of them had probably witnessed Patricia's bullying behavior before, but no one had ever been in a position to call her out on it. Now, watching her face the consequences of her actions, there was a palpable sense of justice being served that had been a long time coming. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake. I was upset about my dress, and I overreacted. It won't happen again." But Marcus shook his head firmly. "You're right, it won't happen again," he said, "because as of right now, you no longer work for this company. Security will escort you out, and you can expect to hear from our legal department about the assault charges." As if summoned by his words, 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the crowd. Patricia looked around desperately, but found no sympathy in the faces surrounding her. The same colleagues who had feared her wrath just minutes before were now watching her downfall with a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The tables had turned completely, and everyone in the room understood that a new chapter was beginning for Morrison Associates. As the security guards escorted Patricia toward the exit, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy in the room remained electric. People were talking animatedly about what they had just witnessed, and I could feel dozens of eyes on Marcus and me as we stood together in the aftermath of the confrontation. I realized that I had just gone from being the most humiliated person in the room to being the center of one of the most dramatic corporate comeuppances anyone had ever seen. Marcus turned to me, his expression softening as he checked to make sure I was okay. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now that the immediate threat had been neutralized. I touched my cheek, which was still tender but no longer burning with pain. "I'm okay," I said, though I was still shaking from the adrenaline and shock of everything that had happened. "I can't believe you did that," I continued, looking up at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "I don't understand why you helped me, but thank you. I've never had anyone stand up for me like that before." Marcus studied my face for a moment, and I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite interpret. "You deserve to be defended," he said simply. "No one should have to endure what that woman put you through." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, introductions, and conversations that I could barely process. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the party, and I found myself being treated with a respect and attention that I had never experienced before. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence for 3 years suddenly wanted to talk to me, to hear my side of the story, to express their admiration for how I had handled the situation. But more than the newfound respect from my coworkers, what stayed with me was the memory of how it felt to have someone believe I was worth defending. Marcus Webb had appeared out of nowhere like a guardian angel, transforming what should have been the worst night of my professional life into a moment of triumph that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. As the party wound down and people began to leave, I realized that everything had changed. Patricia's dismissal would send shockwaves through the company culture, and my association with Marcus Webb had instantly elevated my status in ways I was only beginning to understand. But more importantly, I had learned something valuable about standing up for what's right and about the power that comes from having someone in your corner who believes in your worth. The night that had started with humiliation and despair had ended with vindication and hope. Sometimes, the worst moments of our lives become the catalysts for the best changes we could never have imagined. And sometimes, when we least expect it, help arrives in the most extraordinary ways, reminding us that we are never as powerless as we think we are, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, has a way of finding its moment to shine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.